Well, thank you. Thank you, Christoph, I think. You said you knew nothing about me, and I think you did my whole life history, from Walla Walla to Munich. That's pretty impressive, so thank you. And thank you, Helmut, as co-directors for the center, staff, and students, and all that have helped me get settled here. I've been here 2 months now. It's been great so far. This is just a wonderful opportunity. Thank you all for bringing me and allowing me to interact with you. It's been wonderful. And then thank you for coming out to the first colloquium of the semester. I hope I do it justice. At least at a minimum, I hope I provoke some ideas, some thoughts, maybe some more food and fuel stories, at least that Christoph can use later. Here's what I want to do. I'm going to build a three-step argument that begins by with the first item is that the first statement is that the fossil fuel era will come to an end, but not soon enough. Not soon enough to avert major catastrophic outcomes. Second, and because of that, then, we must figure out ways to accelerate the end of that fossil fuel era. And for that, we must imagine actually ending something that is otherwise so normal, so natural for all of us. And then third, the analytic task is at once sort of anticipatory and normative. That is, it is to identify realistic sources of positive transition out of fossil fuels. And for that, then, I will draw on the past, the present, and the future. Okay? And the way I'm going to approach this is I'm going to do this to begin with by putting forward a preposterous idea, a wild and crazy idea that nobody in the right mind in modern world could possibly entertain. And that is deliberately leaving fossil fuels in the ground. Okay? After I do that, then I'm going to set up develop a perfectly sensible idea, that is deliberately leaving fossil fuels in the ground. Okay? And then I will go ahead and proceed to what I will call the realistic sources of positive transition. Okay? So that's the plan. I'm aiming for 25 minutes as directed, and then we'll have some discussion and questions and so forth after that. Before I get into the argument, though, I do want to say just a few words about the nature of my work. Because in these 2 months here, I've discovered that it's probably quite unlike, it is quite unlike what many people do here. So the best term that I've been able to come up with to describe it is what I do is normative social theorizing. Normative social theorizing. That is, I try to come up with general statements or propositions or hypotheses of what actors should do, that's the normative part, what they should do given a certain set of conditions and concerns. Okay? So the conditions that drive my work then can be framed in many different ways. One is from a systems perspective, excess throughput. From an economic perspective, overconsumption, or end of growth, or the global environmental predicament, or the environmental problematique, if you will, that interconnected set of problems for which you cannot solve any one by itself. They're all connected. Sometimes referred to as wicked problems or the risk society, or my little simple kind of version of it is living beyond our means, both social and biophysical. Okay? So that's the conditions that inform my normative social theorizing. And the concerns are, on the one hand, yes, environmental. What is it doing to the environment? But it's also a concern for what we might call collapse or catastrophic outcomes that, for all I can tell, the best science is pointing in that direction. That's where we're going, and the suffering that entails. And it's also the injustice that it involves at present and likely into the future. So in short, what I mean by normative social theorizing is that I try to draw on the past and the present in order to say what can be, in fact, what should be in the future. Okay? That's a very different kind of project than what many of my fellow social scientists do, and others here, I think. So let me first develop a preposterous idea, that is deliberately leaving fossil fuels in the ground, deliberately ending the fossil fuel era. First of all, there's no way we can stop using fossil fuels. Fossil fuels comprise some 85% of all energy consumed worldwide. And it's not just to power our vehicles or even our factories. It is to provide the food that all of us depend on all over this world. Fossil fuels are absolutely essential to modern life. It is the lifeblood of modern industrial society. No way can we stop using fossil fuels. Moreover, this is a preposterous idea because we're not running out of this stuff. There's plenty of it out there. There's conventional oil, there's unconventionals, and there's all kinds of new technologies bringing up new sources. There's plenty of fossil fuels. We're not running out. Moreover, it's a preposterous idea because humans are not creatures who cut back, who deny themselves. We are creatures who innovate. We are constantly finding new ways of doing things. And so that brings me to the last reason why this is a totally preposterous idea, and that is new technologies. New technologies will come along, they always have come along, to use energy more efficiently and find new sources of energy. Now, some people, there are skeptics who doubt that, but there always have been skeptics before the new technology came along. Okay? So you think about, before the IT revolution, no one could have possibly imagined what that would be like. That after it happens, it all seems very normal to us. And so the idea of leaving fossil fuels in the ground is preposterous because these are perfectly good substances. They power modern society as we know it. They feed billions. And all we have to do is be a little innovative. Prices will rise and spur more innovation and deal with this. Okay? So that's why leaving fossil fuels in the ground is a totally preposterous idea. Now let me develop another idea, what I'll call perfectly sensible. And that is to deliberately leave fossil fuels in the ground. Deliberately end the fossil fuel era. Okay? First of all, what is the fossil fuel era? Okay. It can be defined in both energetic terms and in cultural terms. So energy analysts, and I'm not an energy person, okay? Make that real clear right up front. And thankfully, Christoph did not call me an energy guy. Food, I'll take food, but not energy. The fossil fuel energy, from an energy perspective then, is that period in which the energy source is the dominant source of energy in a particular geographic region. So fossil fuels became the dominant energy source worldwide. And let me see, does anybody know when fossil fuels overtook previous fuels? Any guess let's say what decade it was? Throw anything. 1500s, 1600s, 1800s, last year? Any guesses? Huh? 1930, 1880, 1950, yeah. 1890s. So fossil fuels overtook biofuels only in the 1890s, just in terms of energy. And if you want a visual image of this, go to the Deutsche Museum, go to the oil and gas exhibit, go up on the second floor there, and in the back you'll see an oil tanker truck. Okay. Nice bright green oil tanker truck. And on the side it's just like Amerikanischer Petroleum, something like that. So I assume it was American oil that found its way over here and distributed in this tanker truck. Guess how that truck was powered? Big diesel engine? No. Horses. Okay. Horses pulled the oil tanker truck. Okay. I have another picture from Texas, about the same time, turn of the century. A picture of, I think it was a spindle top with a huge oil development, derricks all across the landscape. And here's this oil tanker truck being pulled by a team of horses. Okay. So the point is that even at that time, around the turn of the century, we were not powering even the oil industry by oil. we were still using horses. So from a cultural perspective then, so from an energetic perspective then, what defines in part the fossil fuel era, it is that time, excuse me, let me back up. So going to the cultural perspective, it was not that long ago that the fossil fuel era began. One way I like to think about it is, I know actually, there are people in this room, I know at least one of us, who have known people who lived before the fossil fuel era. Okay, my grandparents, born north of here, not too far, was before the 1890s. Right? So they lived before the fossil fuel era. So using that past, looking to the future, I would submit it's at least plausible to think about the possibility that there are people in this room who will know people who live after the fossil fuel era. Now I go through that exercise just to try to sort of spur imagining something that is otherwise seems impossible, otherwise seems preposterous. That the fossil fuel era hasn't been around that long, and it will come to an end. This is absolutely, and the reason I do this is absolutely contrary to the rhetoric as I read it of the fossil fuel industry and all that's associated with that, the finance, government, and so forth, for which the dominant line is fossil fuels have been around for a long, long time. They'll be with us for a long, long time. There's no use even trying to deal, imagine it's not going to have fossil fuels powering our society. We need to be more efficient, we need to clean things up, we need to find new technologies and so forth. Okay? In fact, from both an energetic perspective and a cultural perspective, the fossil fuel era is quite recent. Only a blip in human history. Another characteristic of the fossil fuel era from the energetic side then is that it has been a time of easy to get energy, cheap economically, cheap environmentally, you just export the cost somewhere else. It's a dense form of energy, particularly oil, and we've become accustomed, decade after decade, generation after generation, to always having more of it. Okay? Always more of of oil and coal and natural gas. So that's the fossil fuel era, and again, the point here is that it hasn't been that long, and it's not that hard to imagine it coming to an end. Now regarding running out, it's absolutely true we are not running out of oil or fossil fuels generally. Okay? What we're doing is we're filling up. We're filling up the waste sinks. Okay? So we're not running out. One way to think about this is imagine that this distance represents how much oil we have consumed, fossil fuels we have consumed in human history. Okay? It's roughly 1 trillion barrels equivalent of oil. Okay? So that's how much we've consumed to date. There's another roughly 1 trillion conventional oil and other sources available. And then there are 1, 2, 3, or 4 of unconventional. And then some people say out to 13 or even 18 trillion more available. There's lots of that stuff out there. And so if that first trillion has disrupted the climate, as seems to me just unambiguous now, if it has changed the pH of the ocean, again, next time you fly over the ocean, look down, miles deep of water, imagine what it would take to change the acidity of all that. That's already happened with 1 trillion. If we burned another trillion, that doesn't displace the first trillion. That's on top of the first trillion, okay? And then the second. To me, from my perspective, you don't have to do the science to say that this ain't going to work. We're not going to burn all of that. So yes, it's true, we're not running out, but we are filling up the waste sinks. The oceans and the atmosphere and all that implicates cannot take that much and have anything close to life as we know it. Another reason why this is a perfectly sensible idea, that is leaving fossil fuels in the ground, is that humans are indeed innovative. But we don't just innovate gadgets and gizmos. Okay? We innovate how we organize ourselves. Okay? And there is plenty of literature, as I read it, both historical and social science and others, that demonstrates that we are perfectly capable, under certain circumstances, to organize to use less resources than the most possible, what I call sufficiency. Okay? Perfectly capable of doing that. But one of the great innovations, I think, is at the international global level. And that is agreements that have recognized, sometimes almost implicitly, that there are some things that humans cannot handle. We've tried them, we worked with them, and we've demonstrated we can't handle them. So for example, ozone-depleting substances. In the Montreal Protocol, that agreement back in 1987, I think it was, said that there is no rate of ozone-depleting substance emissions that is compatible with maintaining the atmosphere as we need it. So those ozone-depleting substances have been banned. The Stockholm Agreement on persistent organic pollutants. Again, the international community came together and said these substances are not compatible with life as we know it. They are being banned. Yeah. In the CITES Agreement on trade in endangered species, that agreement calls for a banning of species that are threatened by trade. And so, again, the international community has said we cannot handle the trade in rhino horns, and elephant ivory, and a whole lot of other species. Drift nets is another example. Drift nets have been banned as well by international agreement. Okay? Again, innovations. And then if you go out of the environmental realm, landmines have been banned, and maybe someday nuclear weapons. There's been movement over the last 10 or 15 years. It sort of picked up a little bit with the beginning of the Obama administration in the US. Went to the side like a lot of other things. But maybe someday even nuclear weapons will come to recognize that we can't handle those. And so what I would submit is if we can innovate in terms of social organization with respect to those kinds of things, then that is those things that we have demonstrated we cannot handle, then we can also innovate with something like fossil fuels. At least at the rates that we're accustomed to now, the rates of extraction and combustion. So, perfectly sensible idea, keep fossil fuels in the ground. Another way to come at that is to try to find examples where people have actually tried to do that. And when I started this project about 4 or 5 years ago, I must say I just assumed there were no examples in the world. and I couldn't imagine that anybody was actually starting to try to deliberately leave fossil fuels in the ground. And then I ran into a colleague of mine, Pam Martin, who was researching the case of Ecuador. And what she has found out is that Ecuador, as you probably know, is an oil exporting country, has been exporting since the 1960s, I believe. Oil is a major part of its economy, but the country in the last few years has had a public debate and is openly and discussing and implementing the idea of becoming a post-petroleum Ecuador. They rewrote the Constitution a few years ago and included terms such as rights of nature and the good life, all of which implies that all Ecuadorians, including those in the Amazon, including those where the oil is extracted and that has caused great damage, that they have rights to nature and they have a right to the good life. So Ecuador has done more than just talk about it, though. They started a relatively small experiment, but a non-trivial one from the larger scheme of things, and that is a coalition of civil society actors, indigenous peoples, environmental activists, and of all places, the Ministry of Mines for the country as a whole, all came together and negotiated, worked out an agreement whereby Ecuador would offer to forego half of the expected revenues of known oil reserves in the Yasuni National Park in the Amazon if the international community would kick in the other half. Okay? Now that was a preposterous idea at the time, but they went forward with it, and they got international collaborators, and there's now a United Nations Trust Fund set up to do just that. There have been serious problems, some real setbacks. There's a possibility it won't finally get implemented. But to me, the really important thing is that here is a country that has entertained the idea of not using an otherwise valuable resource. Okay. I don't know about your country, but my country, that is completely off the charts. I cannot imagine even saying, I will give this speech back to my country. You'll have to guess which one that is. But here is a country, as a people, have entertained the idea and actually try to move in that direction. So there's one example, and then in this project there are other examples, not quite like that, but at least efforts around the world, north to south, rich to poor, where people are beginning to say, no, maybe we can live without this stuff. Maybe we can deliberately leave oil in the ground. So finally then, to try to make, if I've convinced you that this is both a preposterous idea and a totally sensible idea, then one of the questions that arises is, well, how would we even move in that direction? And what my colleagues and I came to the conclusion in looking at this issue was that ultimately this is not a technical question, it's not a biological and physical question, it's not an economic question, it's not even a political question, at least in the conventional sense of the word, but rather it is a moral question. And so we have come up with a sort of three-pronged moral strategy, if you will, for at least beginning to think about this otherwise preposterous idea. One of them is to posit ethical criteria for actually using fossil fuels. It's easy to say, oh, they're bad, stop using them, let's shift to renewables. But the real ethical dilemma is about fossil fuels themselves. So the way I pose the ethical dilemma is like this. If it is morally wrong to consume all remaining available fossil fuels, and the reason I say it's more self-evidently morally wrong because it would be catastrophic. Remember those trillions and top of trillions. If it's morally wrong to consume all available fossil fuels, how can it be morally right to burn another barrel of oil or another lump of coal? And the ethicists that I've spoken with say, well, yeah, that's one of those dilemmas, all right. There's no obvious solution to that. Good luck. So here's my cut at it. I offer sort of three ethical criteria for approaching that. First is that using fossil fuels is justified if it saves lives. So you can imagine, the hospital, the fire department, the police, military, defense, and so forth. It's justifiable using fossil fuels for that. Second ethical criterion for using fossil fuels is that it's justified to use them if in using them we move out of them. So if you burn fossil fuels to make windmills, and there's some kind of an exchange, some kind of a mechanism to substitute out, to replace, then that's justified. And then the third is that fossil fuels are justified to maintain lives and livelihood, to allow people to thrive. Notice on that third one, that's a conventional development objective, but for the purpose of transitioning, a conventional development objective, but for the purpose of transitioning out of fossil fuels. Can you hear me? Are you? Okay. For the purpose of transitioning out of fossil fuels, it's a tertiary third step. The first one is to save lives, and the second one is to use fossil fuels to get out of fossil fuels. Second prong in the moral strategy then we call a delegitimization. And the basic idea here is that fossil fuels have been at least implicitly deemed legitimate in their first century of the fossil fuel era. We hardly ever questioned them. We knew what the costs were. We knew about coal mining and oil rig deaths and so forth. We always knew that, and asthma and pollution and so forth. But arguably, it was the benefits just completely overwhelmed whatever costs there were. Now, if you project use that past, project into the future, follow the trends as developed in scientific studies, and simple extrapolation, there will be a point at which, with the time lag, cause-effect time lags and so forth, there will be a point at which it's obvious that burning fossil fuels is destructive. If we cannot live on this planet anywhere near the numbers and the quality of life, it will not be beneficial. And so if we can grant that in the first century of fossil fuel use net benefit, at some point we're going to shift into net detriment. Okay? And it's that shift then that is the delegitimization of fossil fuel, is the basis of delegitimization of fossil fuels. And I hasten to say that by saying delegitimizing fossil fuels is not to vilify the industry. There's been plenty of vilification of the oil industry. Standard Oil and John D. Rockefeller, Center of John D. Rockefeller, was called the octopus. And there are these cartoons where all the tentacles of the octopus are reaching out and just squeezing all of his competitors and everybody around him. There's a recent book by a Shell Oil U.S. Former CEO called "Why We Hate the Oil Companies." So that the vilification of the oil industry is long-standing. It's had no effect that I can tell. So by delegitimizing, it's not vilifying the industry. It is trying to rethinking how we as humans relate to our energy sources in general, and in particular to fossil fuels. And so that then leads to the third prong of the moral strategy, and that is to say that at the same time we delegitimize the excessive rates of fossil fuel extraction and combustion of the present, we make special the modest rates that are possible, the modest rates that would support the hospital and the police and so forth. And so that combined effect of delegitimizing and making special that I think I would posit anyway, again, a proposition that would suggest that it's a moral basis for moving out of the fossil fuel era. So let me finish then by just saying that what I'm trying to do here, and just in this example and in this project as a whole, is trying to look at the past and the present to see the future. But not just to see it or predict what will happen, but to actually prescribe what should happen given a certain set of concerns and conditions. And so keeping fossil fuels in the ground is at once preposterous, I fully recognize this, but it's also, I would submit, sensible, it's realistic, there are examples like Ecuador, and it certainly would be moral given the trajectories. So altogether, for me, this makes it not just easy to imagine, but actually imperative to imagine and imperative to enact the end of the fossil fuel era. Thank you.